We've got a unique discussion for you guys tonight. Senator Chris Pearson, progressive Democrat of Vermont, joins us. He is a state senator of Vermont, and we have a little bit of a disagreement. We used to agree very much. We agree on most issues. We used to agree very much on money and politics, but lately we seem to have gone in different directions, and that's why I wanted him to come on. That's why he wanted to come on to discuss this issue. I think. And I hope that you guys will gain a lot from this discussion. Senator Pearson, thank you for coming on the Young Turks. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Great to be here. I'm getting a little delay. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, we can hear you great. All right, so well, let's just set the background here for folks. Vermont was the first state to call for free and fair election reform, and that Wolfpack is a group that I founded. It's one of the other things I do other than being the host of the Young Turks. And that organization pushed for that. And what it really does is it calls for a convention to call for an amendment to the United States Constitution to get money out of politics. And we think that that's the best strategy and perhaps the only strategy available now to get that change that is so critical to the country. If I'm not mistaken, Senator Pearson, at the time you voted for that initially, right?
Yeah, I was a member of the Vermont House at the time, and I don't think we disagree on the horrors of money in politics. I think we're having a disagreement on how to fix it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I even can see that, but we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so now you've gone in the opposite direction. There's a movement to rescind some convention calls. And let me again frame it for the audience and to be fair to you, there are some progressives in the country who think, there's a balanced budget amendment push, which is a conservative push to get a convention, and so that they think that's dangerous. Now, I am among the people who think a balanced budget amendment is a disastrous idea. So in some of the states, there are calls for a balanced budget amendment convention for that topic. And they are looking to rescind that, and they're doing that today. But some are also calling to rescind all calls for a convention. And that is what is happening today in Vermont. And you led the effort to rescind the one on getting money out of politics. Again, tell me if I'm mistaken about that. And if I'm not mistaken, why did you decide to go in that direction?
And the balanced budget idea is being pushed by the Koch brothers, by ALEC. They love the idea of a constitutional convention for the same reasons that I and many progressives abhor it. Jack, I am really worried that we are hastening the fascist takeover of this country. I mean, let's not put too fine a point on it, right? The question you're asking is, why would Vermont want to rescind its call, which I did vote for? And the reason is this: I've learned since that time a couple of facts that I think are hard to dispute. You tell me where you're coming from. That there's no such thing as a constitutional convention that gets called for one or a limited purpose. Even less acknowledges that once it's called and underway, sky's the limit. I mean, here in Vermont, we have town meetings for our local elections, and the last item on the agenda always, and if you're a town moderator, it's the thing you fear the most for hours while you're debating other things, other business. And there's no way that I'm aware of, and this is not really disputed, that you can limit what would be debated should you have a constitutional convention. That's what worries me. That's what worries me at a time when we've, wall-to-wall Republican control in this country, people who are acting way outside of the boundaries of what we would have thought of as conservative principles. And so that's where I start to get really nervous. Then there's this idea that Vermont's call for a constitutional convention for a totally different reason than a balanced budget could be combined with the 28 or 29 calls that are on the books right now for a balanced budget and used to add up to the 34. What is known about that is that Congress has the power to make that decision of whether or not you could combine two very different calls, reasons for a call, into one. And I just don't trust the current Congress at all to act in a sensible, straightforward way that most people would consider to be kind of normal. I don't think we've seen that. We've seen, in fact, them being all too willing to change the rules midstream, to reject decency at every turn, and jam through a very, very aggressive agenda.
Yep. So let me clarify a number of things and answer some of the questions you posed, and then pose some questions back. So first off, the Koch brothers are not for a convention on all grounds. I know that because they opposed Wolfpack in New Jersey. They sent their lobbyists to fight against a convention to get money out of politics. Of course, they love money in politics.
Of course.
So they are for a convention on their issues. And on that, I don't blame them. I'm for a convention on my issues. And I will fight them on their issues, and they will fight us on our issues. I think a convention is part of democracy, it's part of our Constitution, like the vote. We will fight them in elections, and they will fight us in elections. So now that gets the question of, can we combine things to get to a convention? Well, Senator, I'm positive that you do this with good intent, so I don't want the audience to get a wrong idea. I'm not as positive about the people who sent you those talking points. So do you know how many calls for a convention there are in the country right now?
The congressional research folks peg it at 28 for a balanced budget. I know there's been some 700 in the course of history.
Yep.
And I think there's now 5 for Citizens United question, if I'm not mistaken.
So there are, one part of that answer is correct. There's over 700 calls for a convention from 49 different states. Now, the reason we haven't had a convention is because they don't count them together. In fact,
they haven't counted them together. That's right.
That's right. And in fact, right now, if you combine, there's 120 live calls for a convention right now. They could do it if they wanted to. The ones that have been sent to Congress and that they have on the record is actually above 34. So if they could combine balanced budget and our call for convention and campaign finance ones and convention of the states, they would easily have a convention today. But yet we don't have a convention. So I don't understand how anyone could make the case that, well, they could just combine it. They could do that today, but they don't because they can't. It has to be on one issue. For all of American history, it has had to be on one issue. And today they have plenty. They could call for it tomorrow, but they don't do it because it has to be on one issue. And by the way, I'm not the only one saying that. Justice Department has said that, Congressional Research Service has said that, the American Bar Association has said that. So in the face of all of that evidence, I'm confused as to why anybody would not only continue to say they can combine them when it is counterfactual, but on top of that, to go and rescind one that is about money in politics seems curious when there's 695 others.
So a few points quickly. I think you're right that they haven't been combined historically for different reasons. I totally agree with that. We've also always been able to filibuster Supreme Court nominees, right, till this past week. So we're just dealing with a cast of characters in Congress right now who are very comfortable operating well outside of the normal rules. Congressional research pegs the number, to my knowledge, at 28 live calls right now. And I don't know why they've cut it off, but that is my understanding. And then, so maybe I'm wrong on this point, or it's a debatable point. And the thing I come across, and is that whoever is arguing these points, yours and my arguments are the ones you hear, basically, that I've heard in the last couple of weeks. Having confidence on either side is a pretty dodgy prospect, because we've never had it. We've never had a constitutional convention except for the very first one. That one, in fact, ran over the reasons why it was called and obliterated the rules and produced basically the beginning of our Constitution. You seem confident that I'm wrong. I'm confident that I'm right. If I'm right, then I'm taking a cautious approach because I don't want to open up the Constitution while these people are in charge. If you're wrong, what happens when they pull together a constitutional convention that repeals women's right to choice, repeals marriage equality, gives us unfettered access to guns, weakens voting rights? Do you really think these are the people that are gonna let us have a meaningful campaign finance reform. There's 34 states right now, wall-to-wall controlled by Republicans, and only 13 states on the Democratic side. The rest are somewhat mixed. This seems risky to me, and I appreciate your confidence. I just don't share it, and I think it's prudent to be a little cautious.
Yeah.
And I know that Vermonters' values are so starkly opposed to what's happening at our nation's capital that I think it's pretty. I'm comfortable saying Vermont is not willing to make this risky move.
Yeah. So there is a lot that I disagree with there. First of all, I think the current state of affairs is horrific. So I think what's super risky is saying, well, let's not have a good battle plan for getting money out of politics. So let me pause there. I have so many things to say, but do you think Congress, 2/3 of Congress, is going to get money out of politics? That they're going to ask for that amendment?
No, not at all.
So then, what's your battle plan then?
Well, in my case, I've introduced a bill last year to have public financing of elections in Vermont. I'm about to introduce the same bill this year, kind of new and improved.
So that's wonderful for Vermont, which is one of the most liberal states in the country. So the rest of us have to just wallow in the corruption, and not only that, it's at the local level, and it's not doesn't apply to the national level, right?
Obviously, there's limited things I can do as a state legislator, but I have to wallow in the.
Well, actually, one of the great things you could do is call for a convention, which would actually affect all of us.
If we got the results out of a convention that you and I would favor, and that didn't favor big money. I think one of the reasons why the Koch brothers are promoting a constitutional convention is they have confidence in their own ability to then influence the process through their
I want to get to the Koch brothers influencing the process in a second. But first, let me correct a couple of things. The original Constitutional Convention was not an Article 5 convention because Article 5 didn't exist at the time. That's part of the United States Constitution. They were operating under completely different rules. They were operating under the Articles of Confederation. So those two conventions would not be the same thing. And so, in fact, the Founding Fathers built two different ways in Article 5 to get an amendment. And they did that because they were revolutionaries and they wanted you to amend the document. They wanted you to have two different ways of doing it. If Washington was too corrupt, you were supposed to go to the state level to senators like you. And I think that you agree that, or let me ask you, do you agree that Washington is too corrupt right now?
Yes, I do, but you also have to respect that the founders, part of the vision here of spreading this power out to the states was their belief that you would never have so much power concentrated in one direction when you push it out to the states. That's not the case today, right? I mean, Democrats control.
No, they're not on the record talking about that at all. They're worried about.
Well, but that's their basic theory of operation was dilute the power and push it out to the states when in doubt. Keep it away from the feds and push it out to the states.
Exactly, which is exactly why they let you do conventions through the states. And it's not when things are going well and things are in balance. You're supposed to do that when things are not going well. And Washington is too controlled by one interest and too corrupt. So look, you're worried about, and I get it, you're worried about Koch brothers' influence. I hear you on that. I mean, that's a huge problem, right? I mean, for example, what if they were to spend money to influence the delegates that go to the convention, right?
Exactly.
That's right, okay. Now, what do you think happens in Congress when the Koch brothers spend money to influence Congress?
It works very well for them.
It does. So right now, we're already in the worst case scenario that you are worried about, where they can influence the people who they control, and they control a great majority of Congress. And by the way, if you're worried about the parade of horribles that they could do it today. They could just do it through Congress.
No, they can't.
Because you're saying 2/3 of the states or 2/3 of Congress. It's the very, very similar issues, and they buy them today. That's why we're in the worst case scenario.
So they don't have 2/3 of the Senate. I'm not sure if they do have 2/3 of the House, they barely have it. So there is some protection that remains even in this dysfunctional Congress. And the problem with thinking that we're at the worst is that these guys are proving over and over that the worst is yet to come, and it's just subject to the imagination of these corporate bidders and the horrors of I have two little kids. I'm watching the planet melt around us, and Trump's
why is that happening?
Coal, right?
But why is that happening? It's happening because of the money in politics.
Yeah,
and now you're saying we're going to unilaterally disarm. But Senator, they are going to do their convention with or without us. They have 120 calls for a convention that they could activate tomorrow. And so you're saying, well, we should take away our 5 calls for a convention to get money out of politics. And by the way, you need 3/4 of the states to ratify. And you know that they don't have 3/4 of the states. You stated it just a while ago. At a worst case scenario, we have 13 double blue states and plenty of other states with blue legislatures in one of the chambers. So you guys put out this parade of horribles of like, oh my God, they could do the pro-life abortion, as if the convention is the only step. Our Constitution is one of the toughest constitutions in the world to amend. In fact, most experts say it is the toughest, because you got to get 2/3 of the states or 2/3 of Congress, and then 3/4 of states to ratify. There's only one thing that 3/4 of states agree on, which is the corrupting influence of money in politics. 90% of Americans agree to that. 90% of Americans don't agree to a pro-life amendment. In fact, 2/3 of Americans are pro-choice. So to say, oh my God, fear-mongering, oh no, they're gonna do a pro-life amendment, as if they could do it carte blanche. That's not how the system is built. So when you put out that, I can do the slippery slope in the opposite direction. Oh my God, what if they do that in Congress? Oh my God, what if they do this and what if they do that if we keep the system as it is? And by the way, they melted the planet on our watch while we just sat there and did nothing about money in politics.
So the thing is that the Constitution, as it stands now, is actually proving to be the only check we have. If you look at these ridiculous Muslim bans and things like that, we are seeing the Constitution play out a role that is healthy and protecting us. Would I like to see the Constitution go further? Of course I would. But part of your argument seems to be that we are in any way going to be able to eradicate the evils of big money through the Constitutional Convention process. I'm just not seeing that.
Because you won't let us go to the convention, that's why you're not seeing it.
If I'm wrong, okay, and they don't want to combine these separate calls, and suddenly there's 25 states who have come on board with what Vermont has done previously and what 4 other states have done, call me up. I will be glad to revisit this issue. But
no, you don't get to rescind it, and then we have to go through tremendous volunteer blood, sweat, and tears, and very little money that we have to relitigate that battle in Vermont. So look, let me ask you this: do you know if there's other calls for convention in Vermont right now?
Not that are live, according to our research.
So unfortunately, that's not true. There's a live one from, believe it or not, 1912, and Vermont called for a convention to get an amendment to end polygamy. Okay, so now the reason I bring that up is, Senator Pearson, I don't think that you went out of your way to go get the one on money in politics, but I'm not positive that the people who scared you in this direction told you about that. I think they told you about the one in money in politics and said, go get that one.
Who do you think scared me in this direction exactly?
Okay, well that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, because I don't know. So what was the precipitating event that made you go from voting for this to not only voting against it, but working to try to rescind it? Because that's a big change. What was the event?
A friend of mine had done a master's thesis about this way back in the 60s. Brought it to my attention, some of the questions that we're talking about today. And I was skeptical, because I was pleased to support the idea that we could fix Citizens United this way. And so I started doing some research. I reached out to my Congressman, Peter Welsh, who gave his office furnished me a bunch of the congressional research staff.
Interesting, okay.
And so I uncovered it that way, I put it in. I think you've referenced Common Cause in other segments. I wasn't until I had already filed the resolution that I found that document, their document. Nobody has lobbied me or approached me on this other than a friend of mine who had quite a lot of knowledge about it and is very interested, by the way, in getting big money out of politics and other reforms for voting rights, electoral college, and so forth.
So let me review. You asked a national Democrat who got into office through this system And lo and behold, he had a whole bunch of talking points ready for you when you called, saying that this system is one that should not be changed, and that the system that put him in the United States Congress is the one that we should target. Well, that's unbelievable.
That's just not fair at all. It was his staff. They didn't even have an opinion. He said, "Well, I'll find out what Congressional Research Service has."
They didn't have an opinion, but all of a sudden they had all these talking points about how we should keep this system, and they didn't have an opinion or do research on the 1912 call in Vermont. They just happened to do research on the one thing that would keep the system as it is.
They didn't do research. The guy, some staffer, called up Congressional Research Service, nonpartisan, generally thought of as one of the high-functioning, nonpartisan research bodies in the country, and he just forwarded me their reports. They weren't new reports; they were things that, as this issue has been bubbling. One question that I have for you, and I don't know the answer. It's not clear to me why Congressional Research Service pegs a number at 28 for the balanced budget amendment. Arizona passed it last week, so the documents I had were prior to that. I don't know where and why somebody decided to cut off some of the very, very old calls. And it's a good question. And as I said, people have confidence on both sides. The difference is just the ramifications of whichever side is wrong. I'm not seeing a scenario where the current cast of characters allow us to have a constitutional convention that removes the influence of big money in politics, and then any path through the states to ratify that. I think we're just going to have to come up with another strategy. To me, there
is no other strategy. So, okay, I'll get to that in a second. But let me answer your literal question. So I have no problem with the Congressional Research Service. I believe they are nonpartisan. And the Congressional Research Service, by the way, said conventions must be on one issue. They cannot be combined. So
they've acknowledged the
that is their finding, along with the Justice Department and the American Bar Association. So they had 28 balanced budget did, now they have 29. We have 5, and then there are many others. But just those two alone are at 34. But why focus on our 5 when there's 690 others, or at a bare minimum, over 100 others, right? And so now look, again, I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, because you voted with us. I know your intention is good. I know that. And I know some things that you don't know, because there's no reason you would know them. So I know that the National Democrats did the same exact thing in Maryland. They called up the legislators in Maryland and scared them. They said, "Oh my God, the Republicans are crazy, and they're going to do pro-life amendments, and they're going to do this, and you got to get scared." And then, well, you know what you should do? Make sure you don't pass a call for a convention on money in politics. So now I know that you think that the Democrats at the national level, or I shouldn't put words in your mouth. I know some folks think that national Democrats are the good guys. I think that they are among the 10% of the country who thinks there's nothing wrong with money in politics, because money in politics is what got them elected. I don't trust them any more than I trust the Republicans.
Sure. So I've run for office 6 times. This is the first time I've ever run with an endorsement from the Democratic Party. I've never taken a dime of corporate money. I've been endorsed by Bernie every time. The last time I just ran for the state Senate, I had some 17,000 donations. My average donation was $4.50. So I am in no way a stooge of the Democratic Party. I
don't think you
share a lot of your frustration with their generally corporate outlook. It's not fair to say that the Democratic Party, or even Congressman Peter Welch, who does take corporate money, and it bothers me, but is generally a member of the Progressive Caucus in Congress, generally easily among the top 25 congressmen in the country right now, I would argue. He didn't have influence. I just used his office to get access to some of the congressional research stuff. Your argument that they could do it right now, well, maybe that's true. I happen to think it is true, because these guys don't play by the rules of any kind of common sense or decency. But Arizona just passed their resolution a couple of weeks ago. So time is of the essence. Let me ask you a question. If we were at 34 calls for just Citizens United, okay, remove the question of combining different calls. if we were at that call, do you really think the Republicans in Congress and the extreme right-wing money that controls them is going to allow a constitutional convention to unfold where we diminish the power of money in politics? Do you really think that?
So let me explain. So first of all, I don't trust the Republicans one bit. I believe that they will use their power to accrue more power. I am not 1% naive about their intentions.
I believe that.
Now, what I won't do is shred the Constitution or a tool of democracy to try to block things that I don't think they have the power to do anyway. So if you said to me, hey, are you really worried about what Republicans might do if they get into office? I would say yes. If you said to me, and is that why we should prevent a vote? I would say no, hell no.
Right.
If you said, hey, are you worried about what the Republicans are going to do in Congress now? I would say yes, I'm very worried. If you said, let's get rid of Congress, I would say no, hell no. So if you say to me, hey, there's a part in the Constitution that says that you should be able to get an amendment through the states, are you worried about what the Republicans might do there? I would say yes. If you said to me, should we get rid of it or never use it or rescind any calls for a convention? I would say no, hell no. I do not agree to shredding that part of the Constitution. I do not agree with unilaterally disarming and saying because they can do a convention, we shouldn't do one. You should fight them on the merits. And look, if you're the kind of senator I think you are, and that's why I think you supported us in the beginning, and Bernie supports you, etc., you fight them on the merits. We would shred them on a balanced budget amendment. The guys in Washington that you're talking to, and again, I bet you that Peter Welch is not a bad guy. But I know Democratic leadership doesn't want to go forward on this. So they put out talking points and it goes to every staffer of every Democrat. Hey, if anybody at the state level calls you, or sometimes you should actively call them, tell them you should rescind the calls for any convention. You know why? It's not even that they're against getting money out of politics. They're against any change. Because this is their system. They don't want to change the system. So when you say, hey, there's a point in the—
It's hard for me to defend national Democrats, but it is possible that they're afraid of the ramifications of putting Congress in charge
Senator
of this
Pearson, I understand that,
right
but
now.
you know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of the situation we're in today. So when you fight against change, I say, are we winning? Are progressives winning? That we don't want any change, we just want the status quo? No, we're getting mauled out here. Changes to our benefit, not to their benefit. So yes, when they propose a convention of their own, and they have every constitutional and democratic right to do that, and I will fight them tooth and nail on that, and I will lead the charge in defeating them. But when we propose a convention for us, for positive change, it is insane to be on the opposite side of that and say, no, I don't want any change, period. I'm going to rescind calls for all conventions. I'm going to unilaterally disarm. Out of the 700 calls for a convention, I'm going to target the 5 that are to get money out of politics. Now, I don't think you would do that actively, but yes, I do believe the National Democrats tell almost every state legislator, they scare every state legislator into no change.
Well, I can only speak in my own chamber, 30 senators, 23 of us affiliated with the Democratic Party. I don't believe any of us were reached by a Democratic Party official or anything. I took it upon myself. I happened to reach out to Congressman Welch because I know him a little bit. But there's anyway.
But Senator Pearson, look, it's about a groupthink, and so. You happen to talk to Peter Welch, and you happen to go to Common Cause, and Common Cause happen to have their talking points ready too.
Somebody sent it to me after I had already filed
That's right, and so, but what I know is that all throughout the country, Maryland, New Mexico, Hawaii, Vermont, in almost every state, somehow the Democratic legislators went from being in favor of a convention, I know because we've been doing this since 2011, to all of a sudden switching. What was the precipitating event? I know what the precipitating event was. I saw it in every single state. Both Democratic lobbyists, national Democratic politicians decided, no, we're not gonna do a convention. Go tell every Democrat in all these states the correct talking point is no convention at all. How about one on our behalf? No change. That is a talking point that is real, and that is what precipitated all of this.
wouldn't you say the world's a little different than it was in 2011? I mean,
no, but they did it under Obama. They did it last year in Maryland under Obama. I know that Democratic leadership called in Maryland.
Money. Of course, but
it's not Trump. So please, look.
No.
Don't use that excuse.
Well, okay, it's not Trump. It's the entire cast of characters and their shameless bending of the rules to suit their needs. And this is the thing. These guys are like judo masters. They could take our call and throw us to the floor with it. And suddenly we have like even less campaign finance rules after these guys are through with the process. I mean, truly, do you honestly think this Congress is going to create a system that has a healthy and fair debate over the role of money in Congress and in our politics? I just think that's totally naive and wishful thinking. And I think the stakes where we are now, we have seen in the last several years a total disregard for decency and common sense out of national leaders, with whether it's a Supreme Court nomination, on and on and on and on. I just think it's a risky endeavor. So I'm not acting on behalf of the Democratic Party or anybody else. I just look at the facts as I understand them, and I conclude, not with tons of confidence in either direction. I just conclude there's a lot of risk here and a lot at stake, and I'm uncomfortable opening up that door and contributing to opening the door.
But, okay, Senator, so first of all, again, at your level, I completely believe you that is how you have arrived at this conclusion. But I do know that at the macro level, at the national level, this is going on in every single state, and it is not an accident. And I also know that the national Democrats and the lobbyists and the common cause of the world know that there are 700 calls, but they're targeting the 5 calls for the Money Out of Politics Convention anyway. And they conveniently don't do research in every single state. Vermont's not the only state. They don't target the other calls, they target this one. And it's not because, and not everybody involved, and I don't think Peter Welch thinks, no, I want to keep money in politics. I don't know his intentions, right? But I know that they think change is not good. But what I'm telling you right now, and I think what an overwhelming majority of Democrats, progressives, and in fact the whole country agrees is, status quo is not good. You're afraid of change, I'm afraid of the status quo. And I think the overwhelming majority of the American people are with me. So I'm not afraid to fight Republicans. I'll go to their convention, and it's not their convention. And to answer your question, who sets the rules for a convention? States can set those rules. New Hampshire has set their rules in their call for a convention. And if their delegates go outside of those rules, then they can withdraw those delegates. So it is a rare case where the corrupt Congress does not set the rules. Actually, the states do. We've had over 200 conventions at the state level. All the constitutions remain intact. None of the demagoguery actually came to fruition. None of the fear mongering actually came to fruition. No one trashed their constitution and started over. All those 50 states constitutions are perfectly intact, and we've had over 200 conventions at the state level. It is not something to be feared. It is a tool of democracy to be used. And if we voluntarily do not use it for our purposes because we're afraid of what they're going to do, all we're doing is hurting ourselves. If you say to me, hey, Cenk, let's go make sure that the balanced budget convention doesn't happen, I'm right there with you, brother. Okay, and I will fight tooth and nail.
You tell me how Vermont helps that go. We don't have a call for a balanced budget. I would gladly have rescinded that one.
Rescind the 1912 one and reinstitute ours. But to target the only 5 that are actually for getting money out of politics and our only chance of changing this enormously corrupt system. So let's just end on this. So if we don't do the convention, what hope do we have if 2/3 of, we know and you agree that 2/3 of Congress will never call for an amendment to get money out of politics? So at the national level, are we just supposed to sit down and take it? What's the second path?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The path is to get organized at the grassroots level.
And then do what?
When Bernie Sanders ran for president, first of all, everybody laughed at him. And his initial goal was to be able to raise $50 million, not taking a dime of corporate money. He raised over almost $250 million, $27 at a time. Okay, so there's the answer. The answer is grassroots power, grassroots money,
to do
getting
what?
People engaged directly in the process, getting people like you and me to run for office. It's a hard job.
To what end? And I say that literally. But Senator Pearson, so I hear you, and a lot of groups talk about doing protests and getting involved. Okay, that's wonderful, but to what end? So okay, grassroots get involved. So because just to complete the thought, I got everybody involved. Wolfpack's got 35,000 real volunteers all across the country. Not people who sign a petition, but people who go, and you've seen them in your own state, and they show up and they engage in the process. To an end, the end is to get that amendment to get money out of politics. You activate them and then tell them, don't do the convention. So then what do you want them to do?
Well, what I want them to do is run for office and hold office and change the laws and whittle it away. I mean, this stuff is always an evolution.
Whittle it away?
Right?
You're going to whittle away so that we can get 2/3 of Congress to be progressive Democrats?
No, listen, you don't even need a constitutional amendment to change the disastrous campaign finance laws in this country. There's all sorts of laws that you could do. We could have public financing. There's a gazillion ways you can do it. Part of what Bernie
the Supreme Court's going to strike it down. That's why you need an amendment, because they just put Gorsuch on the court. They're going to say no, no, no to every bill. If you were to miraculously whittle them down and 20 years later have a majority of 2/3 majority of not just Democrats, but really progressive Democrats in Congress, the Supreme Court could go, no, I don't agree. I strike it down. It's not an amendment.
I understand Congress could actually take the Supreme Court out of this question, because there is a role for Congress to dictate where the courts actually can step in. But
they
look
tried that, and look at what happened with Citizens United.
I want to say to you, I share an extreme frustration with the pace of change and with the almost laughable presence of any progressive force in this country. It's very, very frustrating, terrifying, particularly when you think about climate change, but a lot of the questions we're looking at, income inequality and so forth. But look at what Bernie's campaign has done at the presidential level. Now you have centrist Democrats signing on to bills for free college. He has proven that it's okay to stand up for populist beliefs, and that was in one election, and the guy didn't even win. So I do think that it is possible for us to turn this ship around, and I think we've just got to engage and not tolerate the crap that we've been given year after year after year. And part of the way we do that is people of sort of yours and my age and younger have to realize that it's our turn. We got to run for office. We cannot tolerate these people anymore, and we got to step up. And we can do that at a grassroots level without taking corporate money, and do it honestly and do it for the righteous reasons that we need to do it. And I think we'll be more successful than most people believe. And at that time, you really are taking on the structure when you shun the big money apparatus that is beholden, both parties in some ways are beholden to. That's really where you start to turn the tide. And so I think there are a lot of solutions. I happen to think a constitutional convention at this time is very risky, and that's where I'm coming from.
All right, I understand. Obviously, that is the issue that we don't agree on. That's why we had this conversation. I know that half of the amendments, more than half of the amendments we have in the Constitution came because of the threat of a constitutional convention. I think that is where the grassroots activism should be pointed at and directed at. But I want to thank you for coming on. And so for the people at home that are watching, look, Senator Pearson voted with us in the first place. I think he's a genuine progressive, and I think that what we want to do and why we have these conversations is to air out not just our opinions, but also to share facts and hopefully get to the right place. At the end of this conversation, we don't yet agree, but I think that we might one day, and I hold out hope for that. And I appreciate that you came on and presented your case. So thank you, Senator Pearson. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's been an honor to chat with you, Cenk, and keep up the great work. You're part of the revolution as I see it, and thanks very much. And there's so much we do agree on. You should have me back some other time. We'll talk about some of that stuff.
That sounds good. As soon as you put the convention back in, we'll have you right back on. No, in all seriousness, thank you, Senator Pearson, for joining us on the Young Turks.
My pleasure.
Young Turks members get to watch every single interview live as it happens. TYTnetwork.com/join.